His last breath was a gasp of disbelief, the sound of a man realizing too late that the mercy shown to him years ago was not forgiveness, but merely a postponement of his execution. He lived a decade in purchased peace, believing that time and silence had washed away his sin. This is the story of how Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson taught an old friend the most brutal lesson of all, that in his ledger, debts never expire. We delve into the long and unforgiving memory of the underworld, exploring the concept of forgiveness as a strategic tool and patience as the coldest of revenges. This man's downfall is a grim testament to the fact that, for Bumpy, forgiveness was not an act of absolution, but simply the choice of the perfect time and place for the final reckoning, with compound interest of fear and betrayal. The story begins not at the moment of retribution, but a decade earlier in the late 1940s. Amidst a violent turf war with a rival syndicate, one of Bumpy's closest lieutenants, a childhood friend named Reggie Smooth Carter, committed the ultimate sin. Pressed by a gambling debt and seduced by the promise of a higher position, Reggie leaked crucial information about a shipment of Bumpy's. The ensuing ambush resulted in the loss of the shipment and the deaths of 2 of Bumpy's men. The betrayal was quickly discovered. Reggie was brought before Bumpy, awaiting death. But in a move that shocked everyone, Bumpy spared him. He stripped him of his status, took his money, and exiled him from the underworld, but allowed him to live with a single, cold warning. Disappear, live your life, but remember that you live it by my grace. To outsiders, it seemed an unprecedented act of mercy. For Reggie, it was the beginning of an illusory freedom. Reggie's fatal mistake was the erosion of memory by time. He moved to Brooklyn, got a job on a dock, got married, and had children. He lived the life of an ordinary man, and as the years passed, the constant fear that haunted him began to diminish. The image of Bumpy became a distant memory, a figure from a dangerous past he had left behind. He began to interpret Bumpy's mercy not as a suspended sentence, but as genuine forgiveness, perhaps an acknowledgement of their long friendship, or a sign that Bumpy, after all, had a weak point. His arrogance began to rise from the ashes of his fear. He saw others who had crossed Bumpy disappear and convinced himself that he was different, that he was the exception that proved the rule. He forgot the most fundamental lesson about the nature of his former boss. Bumpy Johnson never forgot. Every act, every debt, every betrayal was meticulously catalogued in his mind, awaiting the moment when collection would bring the maximum strategic benefit. For Bumpy Johnson, forgiveness was a weapon, not an emotion. By sparing Reggie, he wasn't being merciful. He was making an investment. At the time, an immediate execution of a childhood friend might have been seen as excessively brutal, potentially sowing discord and fear among his other men. Allowing Reggie to live but in a state of exile and disgrace served as a living, walking example of the cost of betrayal. Reggie, the man who had everything and lost it all, was a more powerful reminder than a corpse. But Bumpy also knew that Reggie's value as an example would diminish over time. He was playing a much longer game. He was allowing Reggie to rebuild his life, not out of kindness, but because he understood that you can only take everything from a man who believes he has something to lose. Bumpy's forgiveness was, in effect, the act of fattening the calf for slaughter, patiently waiting for the moment when the sacrifice would be most meaningful. Bumpy's psychology was that of a ruthless creditor. He saw the world through a lens of debts and payments, both financial and moral. Reggie's betrayal created a blood debt that, in his mind, could not simply be forgiven. It could only be paid or transferred. Over the decade, Bumpy watched Reggie from a distance. His subtle, omnipresent information network kept him updated on his old friend's life. The marriage, the birth of his children, the small repair business he started. He wasn't watching Reggie out of nostalgia or concern. He was monitoring his asset. He was hoping Reggie would feel safe, that he would feel comfortable, that he would feel forgiven. Bumpy understood a fundamental principle of human nature. Fear is a resource that depletes over time if not replenished. He allowed Reggie's reservoir of fear to dry up completely, knowing that this would make him careless and eventually useful. The Harlem setting in the late 1950s provided the stage for collecting the debt. A new and ambitious gang of young men was beginning to challenge Bumpy's control, led by an impetuous and violent young man named Dante. They disregarded the old rules and saw Bumpy as an aging king, ready to be deposed. They began attacking his low-level operations, testing his response. Bumpy knew he needed to make a show of force, but not just any show. It needed to be something that resonated with both the old guard and the new, a message that reaffirmed his authority in an unforgettable way. He needed an example that was both personal and universal, a lesson about the inevitability of his power and the reach of his memory. It was then that he remembered his outstanding debt, his decade-long investment that was about to pay dividends, Reggie "Smooth" Carter. The trap for Reggie was set with calculated cruelty. One of Bumpy's men, pretending to be a contact from the Brooklyn Underworld, approached Reggie. He didn't mention Bumpy. Instead, he offered Reggie an opportunity that seemed too good to be true. A chance to use his old skills and knowledge to help with a big heist, a jewel robbery that would put him back in the game financially. For a man like Reggie, living a life of honest but monotonous work, haunted by the ghosts of his former wealth and status, the offer was an irresistible temptation. It was a test to see if the decade of civilian life had truly changed the man. Reggie's hesitation was brief. Greed and the desire to relive his glory days overcame prudence. By agreeing to participate, he broke the only term of his parole, to disappear. He voluntarily re-entered the world that had spat him out, and in doing so sealed his fate. The heist plan was devised by Bumpy, designed not to steal jewels, but to frame Dante's new gang. Reggie, using his old experience, was tasked with planning the logistics. He felt invigorated, important again, his sharp mind working through the details of timing, escape routes, and vulnerabilities. He had no idea that every detail he planned was being secretly fed to Dante through an informant Bumpy had planted in his team. Dante, being young and arrogant, believed he was receiving insider information to intercept the heist and take the loot for himself, humiliating whoever was behind it. He didn't know he was being led to a crime scene Bumpy wanted him to occupy. Reggie was plotting his own downfall, and Dante was rushing to take the blame for it. The final showdown took place on a rainy night in a deserted warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn, the supposed meeting place to divide the loot from the robbery. Reggie arrived first, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He entered the vast, cavernous space, expecting to find his new partners. Instead, he found only a single figure, standing in the center of a beam of light emanating from a bare lamp hanging from the ceiling. Bumpy Johnson. The shock on Reggie's face was total. Blood drained from his face as the reality of the situation hit him with the force of a physical blow. A decade of illusory peace evaporated in a single instant of pure terror. He wasn't there for a payment. He was there for a debt collection. The friendship, the time, the life he had built, all of it vanished, leaving only the predator and the prey, the creditor and the debtor, exactly as it had been 10 years before. 10 years, Reggie, Bumpy said, his calm voice echoing in the empty warehouse. I gave you 10 years, a new life, a chance I don't give anyone, and you throw it away for a handful of diamonds that don't even exist. The turning point wasn't an act of violence, but an act of revelation. Bumpy explained with cold, precise detail how the whole scenario had been a construct. He explained how Reggie's greed had led him back into the trap, how he had been used to lure Dante. Reggie broke down, pleading, talking about his family, about the time that had passed, appealing to the friendship they once had. But he was talking to a ghost. The Bumpy he knew, or thought he knew, no longer existed. In his place was the personification of the law of the underworld, a force that could not be swayed by sentimentality. Your betrayal cost the lives of 2 of my men, Bumpy said. Men with families. A blood debt can only be paid with blood. I simply postponed the payment. The consequence was multifaceted and brutally efficient. As Bumpy spoke, the sounds of sirens began to approach. Bumpy had made an anonymous tip about a gang war about to erupt at the warehouse. At the same time, Dante's gang, acting on the false information, stormed the place hoping to find the loot. They found only Reggie and Bumpy. Chaos ensued. The moment the police broke down the doors, a single shot rang out. Bumpy was gone, vanished into the shadows. The police found Reggie Carter dead on the floor and Dante's gang holding weapons, in a scene that screamed, settling of scores gone wrong. Dante and his top men were arrested, charged with Reggie's murder and a series of other charges the police were eager to bring upon them. The new threat to Bumpy's empire was neutralized without him having to get his hands directly dirty. The symbolic message of Reggie's death was a masterpiece of strategic terror. For the new generation like Dante, the message was that Bumpy Johnson was omniscient and untouchable, capable of manipulating the police and his rivals like pieces on his chessboard. His gang was dismantled, his reputation destroyed. But for the old guard, for every gangster, associate and informant in New York, the message was much deeper and much more terrifying. Reggie's death after 10 years of exile was the ultimate proof that there were no statutes of limitations for betrayal. Bumpy's forgiveness was an illusion, a tool to be used at his discretion. He demonstrated that his memory was long and his reach inescapable. He could touch anyone, at any time, no matter how far they ran or how much time passed. The historical impact of this event was the recrystallization of the fear and respect that sustained Bumpy's empire. At a time when he could have been seen as vulnerable, he executed a move that reaffirmed his absolute dominance. He eliminated an emerging threat, resolved an old betrayal, and sent a terrifying message to all his allies and enemies in a single, complex operation. The story of Reggie "Smooth" Carter became a whispered legend, a cautionary tale about the futility of believing one can outwit the devil and get away with it. It solidified Bumpy's image not only as a strategist, but as an almost supernatural force of retribution, a man whose sense of justice operated on its own timeline, indifferent to time. The symbol left behind wasn't just Reggie's body, but the time that elapsed between the crime and the punishment. The decade of silence was the most terrifying part of the story. It showed that Bumpy's revenge wasn't an act of fervent passion, but a dish served at a glacial temperature. He didn't need instant gratification. His satisfaction came from the perfect execution of a long-term plan, from demonstrating that he was in control not only of space, but of time itself. True power, as Bumpy demonstrated, isn't the ability to react quickly, but the discipline to wait patiently for the moment of maximum impact. Reggie's downfall serves as a case study in the psychology of guilt and hope. He desperately wanted to believe he had been forgiven, that his second chance was genuine. This hope, this need to believe in redemption, was the vulnerability Bumpy so cruelly exploited. Bumpy understood that hope can be a greater weakness than fear. Fear keeps a man cautious, but hope makes him careless. By giving Reggie a decade of hope, Bumpy was slowly disarming him, preparing him for the moment he would let his guard down and take the misstep that would lead him back into darkness. Ultimately, Reggie Carter's fate illustrates the darkest principle of Bumpy Johnson's philosophy of power. In his world, there were no absolutions, only suspended sentences. Every act of mercy was conditional, every pardon a tactic. He viewed human relationships, even friendship, through the cold lens of utility and liability. Reggie's betrayal transformed him from a friend into a liability, and Bumpy's mercy shelved him as an asset to be used in the future. The story isn't about a man who couldn't forgive. It's about a man who saw forgiveness as just another tool in his arsenal, to be used with the same calculated precision as a knife or a bullet, but with a far more lasting and terrifying effect.